One, I tell you, my wife Janelle was so motivated to be here on time after we were so late last week. I mean, she was motivated. She even said Friday, I think it was Friday or Thursday or Friday, I got this message at work. Can we go to first service on Sunday? Because she's got plans for right after Sunday school. I said, yeah, we can go. And so not only are we going to be on time, actually we're going to be a little early, and we're going to go to first service. It was a big morning. She was telling the kids about this around breakfast, and we get out in the parking lot, pull in the parking lot, and one of the boys asked, Mom, are we in time? She said, we're about 5 minutes early. And she had told them at breakfast, or right around breakfast when she was talking about it, she said, the congregation is liable to pass out if we're early. So Ethan gets out of the back of the van and he said, Mom, can we have church if they pass out? So no one passed out, so we had first service. You know, I had no idea. I was telling Adam earlier, the way to get out of that job back there is to get married and have a lot of kids. That's how I got out of it. I used to do what he did, so I was giving him advice. I'm not sure if he's going to take it, but we'll see. But anyway, when I had those kids, I did it to get out of that job, but I did not realize how much fun kids were going to be. I just love when they say those crazy little things, and sometimes they're serious, sometimes they're kidding. I have a lot of fun with my kids. I really do. So anyway, we're getting back into chapter 8 of our Bible problems, and we are going to start off. This is going to take me a little bit to get back here because I don't know how to take that shortcut to get to alleged contradictions of the Bible. Here we go. Okay, we had finished up last week with prophecies, and now we have alleged contradictions. Does the Bible contradict itself? And critics charge that it does. A number of books have been written on the topic, and if you're, as a Christian, if you're interested in doing some digging, and I don't own any of these, but guy by the name of John Haley has some really good books on this. And actually, it's one of his books is one of those books that's on my wish list. I keep an Amazon list of books. Well, actually, I keep a number of Amazon lists on books because I am a reader. And I have all these different topics that I keep these lists on. And one of them is Sunday school. And in that list, I keep these books I want to get, and he's one of the authors that I have several of his books in there. So this morning, we're going to look at a few of these alleged contradictions. So before we start, I just want to say this. I am not coming up here this morning and I didn't cherry pick any alleged contradictions. I'm not going to come up here and I'm going to tell you I have the answer or I know how we settle this contradiction. The contradictions that we allegedly have in the Bible they're few. For the size of the book, there's not a lot of them. That's one of the reasons that when we have one, that critics can pounce. It's like, okay, you put all this stock in the Bible, you tell us the Bible is the Word of God and there's no errors in it. What about this? So they can easily pounce on that. But having said that, I'm not God. I don't know I don't know how these issues are settled. I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to present some theories on them, and I'm okay that I can't tell you exactly how these are settled. So if you came in here this morning, you think, well, I hope that someone tells me exactly how to respond to this contradiction. It's not going to happen this morning. We're going to look at some ideas, and I'm going to leave that in God's hands. But with that in mind and thought, so I don't think that in some of these cases that we can be 100% sure what the facts are in some of these contradictions that we could look at, and we're going to look at two specifically. I chose them from the textbook. I just went with what the author had in there. I've expanded on what he presented on it, but I'm not coming up here and saying this is the answer. Let's just take a look at some of these and go from there. So evangelical authors and scholars have put serious thoughts into some of these alleged contradictions and have searched the Bible for answers, but God alone knows. He knows the facts. As we explore these possible answers, we are simply exploring theories about possible answers. We can't claim that we know every answer with complete certainty. So we'll start with Judas' suicide. And I'm sure you've heard about this issue. In Matthew 27:5, we read that then he threw down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. So Judas goes and hangs himself. And in Acts 1:18, we read, now this man purchased a field with the wages of iniquity, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and his entrails gushed out. Always loved that visual. So disgusting. So a possible consideration for this contradiction lies in the Greek word from Matthew that is translated into hanged. Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this, but not a lot, because this word's debated sometime, but I don't really think it actually matters that much. I probably should have just taken this slide out, because it was part of the research I did on this, and I probably should have taken it out, but it's in here. I'll kind of go over this quick. The word, no clue how to pronounce it, but it's all Greek to me. Means to press, to strangle or hang oneself. So the word's translated in English to hanged. There's some disagreement as to exactly how Judas was strangled. Did he literally hang himself from a tree, from a noose, the way we think of it, or would he have somehow cinched a knot that he would have? Doesn't really matter to me. And again, I don't know that it really has a whole lot of bearing on the question at hand. I guess my main point to that is we're going to approach this from the view that we generally would from an American culture and visualize someone hanging from a tree by a noose. That may or may not be the case. We're not sure on that. The word does leave the possibility open that he could have been strangled. He could have strangled himself somehow rather than hanging himself from the tree. But regardless, that doesn't really, again, I probably should have just taken that slide out. So we can understand why our translators would have used the word hanged, because Matthew is obviously saying that Judas died from some sort of pressing or strangulation. A hanging would make sense, although it is sometimes pointed out that hangings were not a common method of suicide in Old Testament times. Regardless, the fact remains that Matthew states that Judas died from compression or pressing of the neck. So that's what Matthew's saying. And the passage in Acts makes it fairly clear in stating that Judas fell headlong and his body burst open. So which passage got the facts right? And this to me is an easy one. If I'm a critic, this is an easy one to jump on, because we have two verses that give us two different two different descriptions of Judas' death. So it's an easy one to just kind of latch on. So as we consider this, let's think about the authors and their background. So for Matthew, he's interested in telling the story of Jesus from the Jewish perspective. He's recording the regret and the death of the Messiah's traitor. Judas died from some sort of strangulation, possibly from hanging himself. And that's Matthew's motivation. He's telling the story from a Jewish perspective. And he's obviously telling it under inspiration. He's telling the truth about it. but he does have a purpose for the telling. Likewise, Luke does. As a writer of Acts, Luke has a perspective as well. He is a professional doctor. Over and over again, we see him being interested in the details, especially from a medical perspective. Luke cares about what happened to the body, likely during and after death. Luke is quite possibly describing what happened to the body. If a body bursts open, Luke has some interest in that. I was reading how hard it is for a body to actually burst open. Like your skin actually does a pretty good job of holding a body together even when you drop a distance. So I think from that perspective, it's actually pretty impressive for a body to literally burst open and the insides burst out. And I will tell you this, I'm going to call out those of you who are, if anyone's here who's a nurse or in medical profession, you guys have an issue. I hate being around you when you start discussing the injuries that came in that day. I would make a horrible medical professional because I find those things disgusting, and I have listened to the people who worked at the family practice center discuss how impressive that finger that was cut off was, or the things that they saw. I'm like, that's just wrong. But that's the way you guys are wired. Luke would identify with that. He probably would have that conversation with you. He cared. The body burst open. He cares. I say bury the body and get it over with. Let's move on. He was a traitor. So, getting back to our issue. Perhaps the body hung undiscovered in the hot Israeli sun, bloated, and for some reason fell to the ground. So, Judas hangs himself. This is one theory. The body was lying there, it bloated, it fell, and then exploded on impact. The details of the two stories may be different based on the author's perspectives and interests. We don't know. I don't know. It's a possibility. There are details in the past that are lost to us. I'm okay with that. There's another theory that Judas hung himself on a tree that was overhanging a cliff, that the rope broke in the process, and he fell, spilling his innards on the ground. Apparently, there is a canyon close to the area that is traditionally thought that to be where Judas bought the field. The canyon does have some twisted and beat-up trees overhanging it, and it's not hard to imagine someone using a dead branch or a branch that could have broken to try to hang himself, and that branch breaking under the weight of the body. So that's a theory that I've heard, and that's quite possible. So again, I don't have the answer. I'm just saying this is one of those alleged contradictions that are out there. And while we're at it, does anyone have a theory? Has anyone heard a theory? Has anyone had something that you'd like to add to this story? Does anyone have something that I didn't cover about this story that you'd like to throw out there? I just thought maybe someone was out there and said, oh, you missed something, Dean. There's something that I had heard of, or there's a theory that you didn't cover. So we also get into another one, and this has to do with the cock crowing, the rooster crowing before Jesus' denial of Christ. And Mark 14:30 and Mark 14:72 state that the cock crowed twice. The other three Gospels merely mention the cock crowed. So in this case, the most likely explanation is that the rooster actually did crow twice, and the second crowing is the one that Matthew, Luke, and John were referring to in their Gospels. And we'll look at that a little closer here. So in Mark, we see that in verse 14:30, Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And then in verse 68, but he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out straightway, and the rooster crowed. And then Mark's in verse 72, and immediately the rooster crowed the second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. So here we literally have a rooster crowing in that second verse. We have a rooster crowing and then crowing the second time in the third verse. So in Mark, we very clearly see that rooster crowing twice. So we can compare that to Matthew, and I just picked Matthew. We could have picked any one of the Gospels. John has a little less to say about the rooster crowing, although all 4 Gospels do cover the rooster crowing. So I picked Matthew 28, verse 34. Jesus said unto him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And then in same chapter, verses 74 to 75, then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. So immediately the rooster crowed, but it's not saying it was the first time the rooster crowed. The rooster crowed immediately. And yes, he does say, the very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. We get that at verse 34. But it does leave that door open that Mark is just being more precise about his description than Matthew is being with his. So I'm of the opinion, and this I have probably a stronger opinion on than the first contradiction we looked at. I'm of the opinion that Mark offers a more detailed account of Peter's denial, and that the other 3 Gospels record it, but not this particular detail. The fact that Peter was told that he would deny Jesus and that he insisted Jesus was wrong. He was told that, no, he would fail to stand by his teacher, and a crowing rooster would remind him of his failure. Peter obviously did not believe that he would abandon Jesus so readily, but the rooster crowed, and Peter realized what he had just done. So it is very possible in this example that one author is simply providing more detail than the rest. So now we get into a different situation here. So we'll look at an issue with our next apparent contradiction, and this example comes from our textbook as well. And it has to do with the age of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim, as he is carried off into captivity. So in 2 Kings 24:8, we read, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king. He reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. So Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. In 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verse 9, we read, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. No big contradiction here. We have agreement. Both books say 18 years old, except let's reread 2 Chronicles 36, verse 9, from a different version of the Bible. This time we'll go to the New Revised Standard Version, and it reads, Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem. So now we have a very, very interesting situation here where different versions of the Bible are giving us different ages for 2 Chronicles 36:9. And one of them is directly conflicting, but both of them, doesn't matter which version we go to, they will give you the same age in 2 Kings 24. They will all say he was 18 years old. So what's going on here? So according to the English Standard Version, Jehoiakim was 18 years old in both 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, but according to the New Standard Revised Version, he was 8 years old in 2 Chronicles. So which was he, 8 or 18? And why do we have this confusion? So to kind of look at to try to answer this, let's go to the note that is attached to 2 Chronicles 36:9 in the ESV and see what it has to tell us. So I took a screenshot. When I click on the note, it tells me, this little box pops up and says, the Septuagint compares 2 Kings 24:8, most Hebrew manuscripts 8. That's kind of shorthand for saying that the source of the 18, the word 18, came from the Septuagint. And if you guys remember, the Septuagint was not an early version of the Bible necessarily. It was the Greek translation. It's not even a Hebrew Bible. It is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And it has a lot of validity because the Jews were using it in Jesus' time, and Jesus quoted from it. So the Septuagint says 18. The Hebrew Bibles before the Septuagint were saying 8. So why did the translators go to the Septuagint to pull 18 out of there when the Hebrew Bibles that they had at their disposal and were older were saying 8? Because normally the way most committees, translating committees work is that they will always give precedence to the older versions of the older translations. The closer we get to the original manuscripts, those are weighed heavier than the later ones. The further along we go, the more errors we could possibly have in translations. Here we did this funny thing where we went, not only did we didn't just go with the later copy, we went with a translation of a copy. Well, a hint comes here, and this is purely me. I couldn't find anything on exactly how the ESV committee handled this, so I am kind of taking a guess at this. So I could get this wrong. But I think the hint comes right in here. 2 Kings 24:8, which we looked at, says 18. If we go with 8, we have a contradiction, and the Septuagint says 18, so they kind of put that all together. And there's one more little bit of information that we don't see in that note. So kind of back up. Here we see something interesting. The note is telling us, I already talked about all of this. We'll skip that because I actually already covered all that. I don't have insight on what the translators of the ESV were thinking other than this little note. So as I've already mentioned, the translators decided to go with the Septuagint, and at least in part, the decision seems to have been made comparing this verse against the 2 Kings 24:1. So I suspect that another fact may have gone into this decision, and one that's not mentioned but likely has a bearing on the translation committee's decision. While it can't necessarily be proven, there is some thought and some evidence that the 2 Chronicles verse contains a copyist error when it says 18. So there is a possibility that the original manuscript read 18, and that this could be a legitimate error that happened in the copies as the Jews were copying 2 Chronicles, that at some point they dropped, or that change got made from 18 to 8. I don't know that. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm assuming that was part of what the translation committee took into consideration. So in other words, in the original inspired manuscript, verse 8 would have read 18 years old, but somewhere along the line it got changed to 8. And there would have been a reason that the Septuagint went back to or changed 8 to 18. And again, we have no idea. They didn't keep any notes. We have no idea why they changed that to 18, but there would have been a reason for it. And I'm assuming, again, I don't know what the translation committee was thinking, but I'm assuming that had something to do with it. So, while we're talking about that, let's look at this. So, here's an interesting point about this issue. So, just because I could, I decided to compare a number of Bible versions to see how they handled the age of Jehoiakim. And I looked at how 36 versions of the Bible handled it. So we have calling him 8, putting his age at 8. I had 22 versions. Of those 36, I had 22 said he was 8. We had 14 that said he was 18. So you can see there's not even a real consensus by the translating committees as to how they should handle this. 22 one way, 14 another, for a total of 36 versions. It's just an interesting little issue that we have, and one that we normally don't think of because it's generally not considered to be a big issue, but it's just there. So we had a couple examples here with difficulty stemming from two different issues. First, we have the details, and I skipped the whole Judas part in these examples, but we look at the difference in the account of details included in the story of Peter's betrayal. So here, in that story, it's quite possibly just a difference in the details the author chose to share. And then in the second one, we do have a possible copyist error. So these contradictions that are thrown out at us and that the critics are latching on to, it's not just that there's one possible reason for them. There are multiple reasons that those could exist. And I'll be honest, I don't know why, but researching these contradictions takes so much time. I don't know why it took. I'm like, I'm never going to get my PowerPoint finished. This PowerPoint, because it's the second part of, it's one PowerPoint from last Sunday, it's like 82 pages or 82 slides long. And man, about Thursday morning, I was sweating it. I'm getting up early in the morning and I'm never going to get this done. This section here took so much time trying to really do a fair job of just picking. Well, I didn't actually pick the contradictions based on how much time. I just took them from the book, but then tried to be thorough in doing my research on them. These took a lot of time. So I was kind of happy to move on to some of the other ones. So I don't actually blame the critics for emphasizing questions such as this in our Bible. I would as well, if I were them. I would latch on to these contradictions. I don't blame them. But as Christians, I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we have some special insight on every potential difficulty. I do think that the Bible is a long book. It speaks of things that many of the unsaved population can't even begin to comprehend. Certainly there's going to be some difficulties, and I'm okay with that. We can't explain every single one of them away. Just because we can't explain the small number of issues critics like to pounce on doesn't mean that there's an issue with our Bible. It means we're human, not God. Our understanding is limited. He wrote the Bible. They're not issues for him. So let's remember the words of Peter's confession of faith in John 6:68. Lord, to whom do we go? Thou hast the words of life. Thou hast the words of eternal life. So that's kind of my way of saying, let's leave that in God's hands. And I'm okay with doing that. So, the Bible and science. This is one that I do like. Actually, I jumped way ahead, and this is the first part I wrote because it was the easiest part for me to write. So this one was out of the way, and I had to focus on the rest of it. So we can either believe the Bible, or you can either believe the Bible, or you can believe science, right? I mean, that's your options. Believe science, believe the Bible, because the two are incompatible, right? It's just the way it is. They'll tell you that. It seems to be the narrative that many are pushing in modern times. And the truth is, the Bible is not a textbook of science. It's not its point at all. It barely touches on things like physics, chemistry, mathematics, electricity, and other sciences. There's just so much the Bible doesn't cover as far as the science. It's not a book of science. From the evangelical Christian's viewpoint, the few areas the Bible does address issues of science it is still the inspired Word of God and true in what it says. So there's only a few areas that it really gets into, and it's still inspired and true in those areas. So the main areas of disagreement are in the matter of creation versus evolution, or the question of the origin of the universe. These disagreements can generally be broken down into three subjects, so we can consider the antiquity of the earth, the fixity of species, and the origin of man. So we'll take a brief look at those three. So geologists put the age of the earth at roughly 4 to 5 billion years. Geology science does believe in a beginning. They generally agree that the earth did not exist at one time, and I would expand that to say they would generally say the universe, as we know it, did not exist. At some point it came into being. The issue is that there is quite a difference between the biblical account of creation and most geologists' view of the beginning of the earth. So this is where science and our beliefs collide, is in the wide gulf that exists between what they're telling us about the beginning of the earth and what the Bible is telling us. So, the young earth theory of creation. So this is the original Christian theory of creation, and one that is generally considered to be the orthodox position. Most churches, especially if they identify as conservative, would buy into this one, or would hold on to this one. It's the one that many of us in this church hold to, the one the author of the book holds to, of our textbook holds to this, to that view, and the one that I agree with. The universe that we live in is extremely complicated and was designed by a mind far beyond anything we can conceive of. I am not aware of a better concept than the one put forth of the Bible to explain its designer. Then there's the old earth theory of creation. This theory has gained serious ground among Christians who feel pressure to find a solution between science, the conflict between the biblical account and the science of geology, or science. I should probably just drop geology, it's just science in general. That the conflict that exists between the biblical account and science, in some Christians' mind, needs to be settled somehow. So this is the way they settle it. The old earth idea is not necessarily a settled theory, and those who hold to it don't always agree. In other words, what I'm saying here is, even among those who buy into old earth science, have a hard time coming to a real agreement on what that would look like. It's something that it's just not settled yet. I think that many casual Christians find this an easy theory to latch on to because they've been taught evolution, they've been taught Big Bang theory their whole life. They're Christians in their mind. I would call them casual Christians. So it's very easy to just kind of, many people, it seems, exist with, both realities exist. And if they ever have to try to make them mesh somehow, old earth creation is a way that they can do that. It allows them to take the science, those theories, and take Christianity and try to make them work in their mind so that there's no conflict. As people, most of us don't. People are very different in how systematic they want to be with their beliefs. Some of us want to be very systematic and have everything kind of match up to the point that it makes us nervous when we find areas where our belief systems aren't quite matching. And some of us are wide open to whatever. I can believe this, and it doesn't really mesh with this, and I'm okay with that. But most of us are somewhere in the middle, and I think this is a middle-of-the-road theory that helps people fit those two ideas together. So the central idea of this theory is that the Genesis days are long periods of time instead of literal 24-hour days, and that even that longer periods of time could have existed between the days. So days is just a period of time, and quite possibly between the first day and the second day, or the second day and the third day, there was long periods of time that wasn't even counted in as a day. So the 7 days of creation are just an unknowable amount of time. We have no way of knowing how much time it would have been, but it allows for us to have 6 days of creation and a day of rest. At the same time, it allows for billions of years. It kind of meshes the two together. If this view is correct, it could mean that creation would have happened over billions of years and that God slowly, quite possibly using evolution, could have been using evolution as a creation tool. So this also opens the door for God using evolution to create, because he's got all this time. So why create just like that? Ex nihilo, everything just spoken out and boom, it happened. The animal was there. The plant was there. The earth was there. Why would he do? He didn't need, he could use a big bang. He could use evolution to get to that end point. So it's really kind of the why this theory is so attractive to some Christians who are uncomfortable with the idea of God creating in literally in a week. So I believe this issue of creation versus evolution is one that causes doubt for many Christians, and sometimes it's easier just to not consider the facts, so we ignore them. I think it is also an issue that unbelievers feel comfortable using against believers. So I think if you're going to get confronted by a non-believer, this is a likely area that you'll hear them. They'll get you from this one. Well, you believe in creation. You believe in a young earth. It's an area that can get us. I mean, don't all the fossils back them up and contradict us? So personally, from the standpoint of pure reason, this is me personally from the standpoint of reason and not even faith, I find that the theory of the Big Bang style start to the universe and the theory of evolution have many more problems than those who unquestionably believe them acknowledge. So when people are kind of taking these as their gospel truth, I think they overlook a lot of the issues that go with it. And that's also why there are some really wacky theories of the origin of the universe out there. I've talked already. I have a friend, used to be a co-worker, who was an atheist, and when I asked him, what's your theory of the origin of the universe, he's like, well, somewhere off in some universe, somewhere there's this black hole that sucked in all this matter, and it went down this black hole, and it shot out on this end, and that was the Big Bang. It exploded here, and that's how our universe came to be. And he's not alone in that. A number of people believe that, but that's still not the origin of the universe, because where is that other Where's the other end of that black hole, and how did that matter get to exist there? So it's just bumping that, kicking, as they say, kicking that can down the road. It still doesn't tell us where matter started. It still doesn't tell us. It really fixes nothing as far as I'm concerned. So now, species, the fixity of species. So to consider this question, we have to decide what we mean by the word species. So Britannica.com defines the word as a classification compromise that comprises of related organisms that share common characteristics and are capable of interbreeding. That's a big one for us. They have to be capable of interbreeding. And if that is our definition, then evolution is not only possible, but it happens. It can happen in very short periods of time. So if I own beagles and I decide I want to breed beagles to achieve a long-legged, fast-running beagle, I can do it. If I would have started a project like this as a teenager, I could have developed a line of dogs that would have longer legs than standard beagles do. I could have achieved this through selective breeding. It's a very simple form of evolution. In fact, if I bred long enough, I could develop a new breed of dogs. There are people out there who are developing new breeds of whatever. Take any domestic animal you want, they're developing new breeds. Sometimes they put their whole life into developing a breed, because there's this thing where you pick the animals you want. You might pick different breeds, and you breed them together to get the one you want. But now, just because you have an animal that you have a couple animals that are the way you want them, if you continue to breed them, they'll go back to the original breeds. They tend to go back. So you have to fix that. You have to settle on that so that the Holstein doesn't revert back to whatever it was bred from, or whatever breed you have. You've got to get that fixed, and until that point, you don't have a new breed. So it's a complicated process, you have to really get into it, but it's possible. Nothing I'll ever do with my life. I don't have enough interest in it, but people do that. But species are fixed in that I cannot breed a dog into a bird or into a reptile. Now, obviously, even if I tried to breed a dog into a bird or breed into a reptile, a lifetime wouldn't be long enough to accomplish that, even if it would be possible. But I don't believe it is possible. I don't believe that you could ever do it over an indefinite amount of lifetimes. I don't think you could ever change an animal into another species entirely. I can only breed another version of a dog, and I cannot change my breeding stock into an entirely different species. So science would like to claim otherwise, and in fact they do. So apparently I'm wrong because science says I am. They would say if you add millions of years and genetic mutations into the mix, and you now have a recipe that changes goop into humans. That's really what it boils down to. You add enough years, millions of years, and you add genetic mutations into the mix, and you do. Now you have a recipe that will produce a man from goop. And now, man can choose to believe whatever theory of his origin that he wants, and many have chosen to believe that they did come from that goop over a time of millions of years. So I choose to believe that you and I were designed by the most powerful being in the universe, the God of the Bible. So it would be good to remember, here it is good to remember that the best proof of evolution is shaky at the best. The earth is not filled with fossils of transitional creatures moving from one species to another. It's actually one of the biggest embarrassments of Darwinism. According to Darwin's theory of evolution, we should be finding many transitional fossils, and we're not. Remember how every time they find a new missing link, how big the deal it is? And honestly, you're not hearing a whole lot about it these days, but if those of you who are older will remember some of the missing links that were found. Some of them were absolute frauds. But that was a big deal because they have to find them. The Earth should be filled with them. We should have many, many fossils of those missing links. I'd also like to mention that I do believe that animals evolve. I believe in evolution, just not the theory of evolution. The way I describe it is small e evolution versus large e evolution. I have no issue with small e evolution. Between species that can interbreed, that happens. And matter of fact, Darwin latched onto that when he examined those finches on the islands that were so famous for, and they're still connected to Darwin. The finches, based on the island that they were on and the food available, the same species of finches developed different beaks over time to deal with the food that was available. And that was some of his proof of evolution. I have no issue with that part of it. Yes, the finch will develop a beak over years. The birds that had a certain beak are better fed, they're stronger, they're going to be breeding, they're going to have their offspring, and their offspring will have a beak that slowly over time is shaped a little different than the birds on another island that was feeding on a different kind of food. So large E evolution, or the theory of evolution, is a different story. It is so improbable that it is one of the main reasons that the Earth would have to be billions of years old for it to have happened. So large E evolution, the theory of evolution, is so hard to make happen that the Earth has to be billions of years old for it to have happened. It's the only way it could have happened would have been with all that time. So if you start off with that as your premise, that large E evolution is real, there's no other way than the Earth has to be all these years old. And in fact, the age of the Earth kept getting pushed back farther and farther because they realized whatever the age was, they didn't have enough time for evolution to happen. So what you do, you push it back by another hundreds of millions or another billion years, so you have the time for this recipe to cook. You had the recipe there, but it needed to develop. But I got to have time, and I got to have billions of years for it to happen. And then we have the age of man. It's another interesting topic, and the scientific information on it is constantly changing. Here's a rough outline of the older theory of man's evolution. So this is an older theory. It's no longer considered to be valid, but this used to be taught. So primitive man, the origin of primitive man was about 500,000 years ago. So about 500 years ago, primitive man came to the scene. Neanderthal man, about 60,000 years ago. And then Cro-Magnon man, about 25,000 years ago. So this used to be taught as science. This is when man came to the scene and the various types of man. So more recent discoveries are changing all that. When I say recent, I'm not talking 80s and 90s. We're going back, when I say recent, it's still going back 100 years, several hundred years ago maybe. When I say this, in this case, recent isn't like last year. The discovery of human fossils at Mount Carmel have been dated back to about 125,000 years ago. And this date was pushed back even farther by more recent research, which has dated the age of the earliest human back to millions of years. So we had the oldest man at 500,000 years. Well, again, that just wasn't enough time, new discoveries, so now we have to push that back. We're in the millions of the years now. So I don't stay up to date with the development in the field of human fossils, but I do believe that science now claims evidence of increasingly older human fossils, and I suspect the date will be pushed back farther and farther as new discoveries are made. And I believe that. Wherever they are today, I suspect, whatever they tell you that the first man, from an evolutionary standpoint, came to the scene, I do believe it will be pushed back even farther, because one of the things that evolution has to have is many, many years. And they almost never, they never settle on it right the first time. They realize, oh man, we got to have millions and maybe even billions of more years, so we got to keep pushing it back. It's just the way it works with evolution. You always have to go back. You always need more time for these developments to happen.